0-100 on a chilly November morning in 1951. The mist gradually dissipates over the Port South Harbor as Captain Dennis Cambell steps onto the gangway of the HMS Illustrious. Tucked inside his briefcase lies a single sheet of paper, a simple diagram that a child could easily replicate. The flight deck is angled 10 degrees to port, an unassuming detail that, unbeknownst to Cambell, will soon revolutionize naval aviation and save countless lives. 0-16 What the captain is acutely aware of, however, is the grim reality that has plagued the Royal Navy in the past year. In the span of 12 months, 43 aircraft have been lost in landing accidents, resulting in the destruction of these machines and the tragic deaths of 17 pilots, with dozens more sustaining severe injuries. 0-34 Every single one of these devastating incidents occurred during the critical final approach and landing phase. The concluding moments of a high-stakes carrier landing operation were fraught with peril. A 30-ton jet hurtling at 140 miles per hour had to snag a wire on a pitching deck, with a steel barrier looming just 60 feet ahead, ready to shred any aircraft that failed to hook up. The American forces faced even more daunting odds. In 1951, the U.S. Navy's carrier aviation suffered a staggering 776 Class A mishaps, accidents resulting in fatalities or aircraft loss, occurring at a rate of more than 2 per day. The Korean War, despite being a time of peace, only exacerbated this carnage. The USS Boxer reported 7 barrier crashes in a single deployment, while the USS Princeton lost 9 aircraft in just 4 weeks. On straight-deck carriers, missing the arresting wires meant an unavoidable collision with the barrier at full speed. The dawn of the jet era had arrived, but carrier-based aviation struggled to adapt. The F-9F Panther, a sleek jet fighter, landed 40 knots faster than the venerable propeller-driven Hellcat. Its powerful engines, however, took a crucial 7 seconds to spool up from idle, an eternity when plummeting towards the ocean at 20 feet per second. Landing signal officers on the carrier's port quarter frantically waved their paddles, but by the time a pilot recognized their perilous approach, it was often too late. The harsh realities of physics had already sealed their fate. This truth was known to every admiral, engineer, and test pilot who grappled with the challenges of this new age of aviation. The realm of carrier-based aviation had reached a critical juncture. Jet-powered aircraft were the undeniable way forward, but the present realities were taking a devastating toll on personnel. What Captain Cambell and his colleagues in that Port South conference room failed to grasp was that his unconventional proposal would be dismissed, ridiculed, and deemed impossible by the very experts tasked with solving such complex challenges. Yet the breakthrough would not emerge from committees or wind tunnel tests, but from one man's unwavering determination to prevent good lives from being lost due to a design flaw. The origins of this pivotal moment traced back to 1945, when Lieutenant Commander William P. Rahn accomplished the first ever jet landing aboard the USS Wake Island. His FFR-1 Fireball touched down on the deck, marking a significant milestone in the evolution of carrier-based aviation. At a blistering pace of 90 knots, outpacing any piston-powered fighter by 20 knots, the arresting gear's 325 cables screeched as they absorbed the immense kinetic energy. The landing was a success, despite the ignored warning. By 3/33/1950, every major naval force confronted the same crisis. Jet engines had revolutionized speed and altitude, but their sluggish throttle response had created a deadly trap. On 340 propeller-driven aircraft, pilots would chop the throttle upon the landing signal officer's command, literally falling onto the 346 deck. Jets, however, couldn't replicate this maneuver. They had to maintain thrust until 354 the wheels touched down, as their engines took too long to accelerate if a go-around was required. 4 o'clock This scenario was a veritable nightmare. Pilots flew their final approach 407 with unwavering focus. With engines spooled up, the aircraft committed to landing, unable to climb quickly if they missed the wires. On a straight-deck carrier, 4 arresting wires stretched across 60 feet of the deck. Behind them stood the crash barricade, a web of steel cables designed to catch aircraft that missed the wires. Further back, Rows of parked aircraft, fuel trucks, and ammunition carts filled the deck, transforming it into an active combat zone. The mathematics were unforgiving. A Panther landing at 125 knots covered 211 feet per second. If a pilot missed all 4 wires, they had a mere 2.1 seconds before hitting the barricade. The barricade worked sometimes, but when it failed, 30 tons of jet fuel and the USS Courage's air operations officer, Captain Bruce Williams, witnessed a tragic incident in March 1951 where a barrier failure resulted in the loss of 11 lives. A 503 ordnance plowed into the parked aircraft at a staggering speed of 100 miles per hour. The accident report revealed that the aircraft struck the barrier at full power, causing it to separate and the aircraft to continue forward, colliding with 6 parked Corsairs. The resulting fire reached the aviation gasoline stores, ultimately destroying 14 aircraft and killing 11 personnel, with 23 others injured. Carrier operations were suspended for 48 hours as a consequence. The search for a solution led to the development of the flex deck by the British, a rubberized landing surface that theoretically could catch jets without landing gear. Test pilot Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown made 40 landings on the system at Farnborough, and he deemed it fundamentally 604. The Bureau of Aeronautics invested a substantial sum, $3.2 million, to develop the Davis barrier system, a mechanical web designed to halt a 25,000-pound aircraft traveling at full speed. While impressive when functional, its failure resulted in catastrophic consequences. However, reinforcing the barricades did not prevent crashes, merely confining the devastation. Senior aviators recognized the true issue lay with the flight deck itself. In June 1945, Captain William T. Roger, responsible for aviation military characteristics at the Office of the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations, asserted that existing landing procedures compelled all aircraft into a 60-foot impact zone with little margin for error. The design of our aircraft carriers was tailored for propeller-driven planes, which could land at a relatively slow speed of 70 knots and abort at the last moment. However, the arrival of jet aircraft fundamentally changed the game. These new planes required landing speeds of 130 knots and lacked the ability to abort at the last second. In essence, we were attempting to accommodate 1952-era aircraft on 1942-era ship designs. This mismatch was a recipe for disaster, and everyone recognized the problem, but no one could find a viable solution. Various nations experimented with different approaches, such as the British's attempt at flex decks, the Americans' efforts to improve barriers and backup systems, and the French's efforts to reduce aircraft weight. Yet, none of these measures proved effective, and the accident rate continued to climb. What was needed was someone bold enough to challenge the fundamental assumptions that no one had dared to question before. Dennis Cambell, a naval officer born in 1907 in Southsea, England, had an unexpected role to play. Initially a bureaucrat, he entered the Royal Navy in 1925 and qualified as a pilot in 1931. His experience spanned the transition from fabric biplanes to the demands of modern naval aviation. During World War II, he flew the Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers, the aging yet effective aircraft that disabled the Bismarck. Though he earned the Distinguished Service Cross, Cambell was not regarded as a prodigy. The landing area had to be aligned with the ship's axis, a challenge that required Campbell's expertise. As a seasoned pilot, he understood the technical precision needed in naval aviation, no longer a mere gentleman's pursuit. His bureaucratic role was unexpectedly crucial in solving a critical problem. After the war, Admiral T appointed him as the Deputy Chief RN Representative at the Ministry of Supply, a desk job managing the technical liaison between the Navy and civilian contractors. Despite lacking engineering credentials or advanced degrees, his role involved paperwork, tracking development schedules, attending coordination meetings, and signing requisitions. However, Dennis Cambell possessed a unique quality that credentials could not provide. He could not ignore the fate of the test pilots. In 1951, he attended the funeral of Lieutenant Michael Mick Lithgow, a 23-year-old test pilot who had been his student and was killed when his jet hit the barricade on HMS Implacable. Lithgow had executed a perfect approach and maintained the correct speed, but had floated 6 feet too far. The tragic incident unfolded as Lithgow's aircraft, which took to the skies at 9:41, disintegrated after failing to clear the barricade. Tragically, his widow was 5 months pregnant at the time. At the 947 graveside, Cambell, standing alongside Lieutenant Commander Nick Goodhart, his deputy, expressed his anguish, declaring, "This is insane. We're murdering them with our own equipment. A pilot does everything right and still dies because 60 feet isn't enough margin for error. There has to be another way." While Goodhart expected nothing more than the typical officer's lament at a funeral, Cambell remained consumed by the tragedy, delving into accident reports, interviewing LSOS, and studying landing patterns. As a non-engineer, he resorted to the time-honored approach of sketching diagrams, and it was during a train ride from Portsmouth to London that the revelation struck him. Cambell envisioned carrier decks in his notebook, seeking ways to provide pilots with greater maneuvering space. If extending the landing area's length proved unfeasible, widening it could be the solution. However, with the ship's beam fixed, angling the flight deck presented an alternative. He sketched a 10-degree port-side canted deck, where the landing zone extended beyond the barricade into open water. This allowed pilots who missed the arresting wires to apply full throttle, climb away, and attempt another approach, avoiding the risks of a catastrophic collision with parked aircraft. The simplicity of this concept struck Cambell as almost self-evident, suggesting he might have stumbled upon a groundbreaking innovation. On 7 August 1951, Captain Dennis Cambell gathered a group at the Ministry of Supply. Joining him were Louis Bodington, Director of the Naval Air Department Foreign, Rear Admiral M.S. Slattery, Chief of Naval Research, and 6 senior aviation engineers. Cambell opened his briefcase and presented his sketch, sparking an immediate reaction. Commander James, a senior flight operations specialist, stated firmly that the proposal violated the International Air Navigation Convention, which mandates alignment with vessel axis for all flight operations. The engineers were stunned, questioning whether Cambell had discovered something groundbreaking or overlooked an obvious fact known to seasoned professionals. The room erupted in discussion, as the group grappled with the implications of Cambell's unconventional approach. "After years of carrier operations, this is no innovation, Captain. It's merely amateur nonsense." Cambell had anticipated resistance, but not this condescension. "You're asking pilots to land across the ship's natural motion. Carriers constantly pitch and roll around their keel. An angled deck means pilots approach at an angle to that motion. They'll be fighting drift continuously. The landing area will be shifting beneath them in unpredictable ways. This will increase crashes, not reduce them." Lieutenant Commander Goodhart began to respond, but Louis Bodington, the civilian engineer from Farnborough, raised his hand. "Show me the math," he blinked. "Pardon me?" Bodington repeated. "The math. You claim pilots will." Calculating the drift dilemma. An 8-degree tilt on a deck traversing through 1307 rolls of 12 degrees. Determining the differential drift over a 30-second approach period. 1313 silence. Bodington surveyed the other engineers. No response. 1320 Then we'll test it, Bodington declared. "Captain Cambell, the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough 1326 has a marked runway outline. We can paint an angled deck layout on HMS 1332 Triumph's flight deck. Within a week, we'll conduct simulated touch-and-go exercises. If 1338 the drift issue is genuine, we'll measure it. If it's merely theoretical catastrophizing, 1343 we'll know for certain." Rear Admiral Slattery leaned back. "Louis, you 1349 understand that if we paint an angled deck on Triumph and pilots start crashing, you're ending both your career and the project." The naval trials commenced in September 1951, with the HMS Triumph departing Portsmouth. Her flight deck had been adorned with a white outline, simulating an angled configuration, though no structural modifications had been made. For 3 weeks, pilots conducted touch-and-go approaches, treating the painted line as the true deck edge. Contrary to predictions, the drift issue did not materialize, and the pilots adapted within 2 landings. As Lieutenant Peter Chilton, one of the test pilots, later recounted, "I came in too high, floated past the wires, and for the first time in my career, The experiments had revealed a newfound sense of liberation. Shaken but undaunted, the pilot surged forward, seizing a precious opportunity for redemption. By October, the experimental deck trials had validated the innovative concept, yet the real challenge lay in convincing the skeptics. While the British carrier HMS Triumph grappled with its own issues, the American counterpart faced an alarming crisis, with pilots perishing at twice the Royal Navy's rate. Unsurprisingly, the U.S. Navy bristled at the prospect of British officers dictating their operational procedures. On September 14, 1951, at the U.S. Naval Air Test Center in Maryland, Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown prepared to present his case. The Royal Navy's preeminent test pilot, renowned for his unparalleled expertise in aviation, now stands before a gathering of 40 American counterparts, his every move scrutinized as he prepares to deliver a bold assessment. With a lifetime of experience landing an unmatched variety of aircraft, Brown holds the distinction of setting numerous British naval aviation records. Yet, in this moment, such accolades pale in comparison to the gravity of his message. Addressing the assembly, Brown wastes no time in broaching a sensitive topic. He inquires about their recent experiences, asking how many have collided with the carrier's arresting gear. One by one, hands rise, until a significant portion of the room has acknowledged such incidents. The somber acknowledgement that some have even lost colleagues to these mishaps underscores the urgency of Brown's purpose. Reaching into his briefcase, Brown prepares to present his findings, aware that the weight of his words could challenge the very foundations of the American naval aviation program. The Royal Navy has been experimenting with a revolutionary concept that may seem outrageous at first glance. However, I can assure you that I have personally experienced 63 successful landings on this unconventional system, and I am standing here before you unscathed. I ask that you hear me out and consider the merits of this innovative approach. Cambell's diagram depicts an aircraft carrier flight deck angled 8 degrees to port, eliciting an immediate reaction of disbelief from the audience. "You want us to land sideways?" they exclaim. "The landing signal officer won't be able to see the approach angle, and what about the island? You've moved the landing zone closer to the superstructure." Brown allows the initial outrage to subside before continuing. "Every single one of those objections was raised during our testing process. And here's what we found." The seasoned commander, Harold Buell, who led the VF-84 unit, rose to his feet. He asserted that he had been conducting carrier landings since 1943, and what Commander Brown was proposing violated the principles they had honed over 8 years of combat operations. Buell implored Brown to cease sacrificing lives due to a design flaw. A hush fell over the room as Brown persisted, explaining that they were landing jets on straight decks because that was the available technology, even though those decks had been engineered for propeller-driven aircraft like the Corsair and Hellcat, which could throttle down and settle onto the deck. Jets, however, lacked that capability, forcing them to adopt a perilous approach. The year 1952 witnessed the integration of aircraft into the operations of 1942, leading to the tragic loss of 18 lives. Yet, the angled deck design did not violate established doctrine. Rather, it adapted the carrier to accommodate the evolving aircraft. Rear Admiral Apollo Susk, the senior U.S. Navy aviator in London, stepped forward, having observed the successful Triumph tests. He affirmed Commander Brown's assessment, recommending parallel trials on the USS Midway to the Chief of Naval Operations. However, Rear Admiral Alfred Pride, the Chief of the Bureau of Aeronautics, expressed skepticism. He argued that existing solutions, such as the Davis barrier, had an impressive 98.7% success rate. But Commander Brown interjected, questioning the relevance of this statistic, as it failed to account for the pilots who never reached the barrier due to other factors. The room was abuzz with heated debate as the pilots grappled with the implications of the barrier performance statistics. Some nodded in agreement, while others appeared ready to challenge the Admiral's stance. Recognizing the need for a measured approach, Admiral Susk firmly intervened, calling for silence and order. He proposed a plan to thoroughly test the angled deck concept on the USS Midway, starting with paint trials and simulated landings. If the trials proved successful, they would move forward with modifying one carrier for full implementation. However, if the tests failed, the idea would be abandoned. The admiral emphasized the importance of finding a solution to prevent further pilot casualties, rather than continuing with a design that could potentially be improved. His directive was clear. They would explore this option and make an informed decision, rather than risking more lives. The officer remained silent for a brief moment, contemplating the gravity of the decision. Midway trials were then authorized, but the commander made it clear that any additional casualties would result in the immediate termination of the program and the dismissal of all associated personnel. The agreement was reached, and the meeting concluded. As Brown packed his briefcase, he realized he had staked his career on a seemingly simple painted line. Little did he know that within 90 days, this painted line on Midway would prove so effective that the U.S. Navy would transform the USS Antietam into the world's first true angled deck aircraft carrier. If you're captivated by the pivotal moments when an individual's bravery altered the course of history, make sure to subscribe and activate the notification bell. The events that followed this decision would have a profound impact on the future. The pioneering pilot's historic touchdown on Antietam's unconventional deck forever transformed naval aviation. Yet, the story truly begins on January 12, 1953, off the coast of Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. There, Lieutenant Commander Harold Buell guided his F-9 F-5 Panther into the landing pattern behind the carrier Antietam, marking his 43rd carrier recovery. However, this approach would be unlike any other he had experienced, as the vessel featured a novel 8° angled deck, structurally integrated into the hull, rather than the traditional painted surface. Buell, a seasoned aviator whose training had instilled a deep reliance on the arresting wires or barricade to ensure safe landings, now found himself confronted with a radically different reality, one in which he was being asked to discard his long-held assumptions. The naval aviator carefully adjusts the aircraft's landing gear, fine-tunes the trim, and announces the ball's position at 21:22. Panther Ball 3.2, Roger Ball. The landing signal officer responds at 21:28. Buell's approach appears flawless until a sudden gust of wind catches him off guard. At 21:35, the aircraft is 6 feet high on a straight deck, a situation that would typically prompt a wave-off, forcing the pilot to climb, burn fuel, and attempt another landing. However, on an angled deck, being high is not a catastrophe but an opportunity for correction. Buell gently lowers the nose, bleeding off altitude, but now he's long, risking missing the arresting wires on a straight deck. This is where panic would typically set in, but aviators make frantic adjustments that result in catastrophic impacts. Yet Buell 2213 resolutely adheres to the operational plan. If you miss, you climb. The deck is 2218 unobstructed. Trust it. His wheels slam down. He bounces once. His tailhook skips 2224 over the first arresting wire, skips over the second, skips over the third, skips 2231 over the fourth. He's missed them all. On a straight deck, the barricade 2237 would already be tearing his aircraft asunder, but there's no barrier, only open expanse and clear atmosphere. Buell shoves his 2245 throttle to maximum. His J-48 engine spools up in 6 seconds. An eternity that 2251 feels like a reprieve. The Panther lifts. He's airborne again. 23 seconds. Later, at 2257, he's back in the pattern. On his second approach, this time he successfully catches the 3-wire, resulting in a perfect landing. Buell climbs out of his cockpit at 2306, shaking not from fear, but from the relief of shedding a burden he had unknowingly carried for years. As he would later write in his autobiography, for an experienced tail hooker, landing a jet aircraft on an angled deck was a profound experience. For the first time in his career, he was no longer afraid of dying during every approach, and he didn't realize the psychological weight he had been carrying until it was gone. Over the next 60 days, Carrier Air Group 8 made 1,327 landings on Antietam's angled deck, recording 8 successful recoveries. On a typical straight-deck carrier, the scene at 2348 could have been disastrous. 8 aircraft attempting to land might have resulted in 5 barrier crashes, 2 destroyed planes, and potentially 1 or 2 pilots killed. However, the angled deck introduced at 2355 completely transformed the outcome. With this innovative design, there were 0 crashes, 0 destroyed aircraft, and 0 injuries. The undeniable data at 2401 speaks volumes. Prior to the angled deck, between 1950 and 1952, the U.S. Navy's carrier aviation experienced an average of 647 Class A mishaps per year, with landing accidents accounting for 52% of all losses. But after the angled deck was implemented, from 1955 to 1957, the number of Class A mishaps dropped to just 321 per year, and landing accidents made up only 19% of the losses. This remarkable 75% reduction in landing accidents and 80% decrease in barrier-related fatalities is a testament to the profound impact of the angled deck. Yet, the statistics alone do not capture the human stories behind this transformation. One such story is that of Lieutenant James Davidson, whose experience on March 8, 1953, the battle-scarred Panther of Davidson returns to the Antietam Naval Base. 2444 hydraulic malfunction. No flaps available. Touchdown speed 20 knots too rapid. On a straight 2451 deck, he would have opted to ditch in the ocean rather than risk a barrier crash at 145 2456 knots. Yet Antietam features an angled deck. Davidson attempts 4 approaches, misses 25.02 the arresting wires on every try. On the 4th attempt, he snares the 4-wire 25.08 at 142 knots, the quickest successful carrier landing documented up to that juncture. 25-14 his aircraft halts with merely 11 feet of deck remaining. He pens a letter to Captain Cambell 25-26 months later. I never had the honor of meeting you, but I'm alive to compose this missive 25-26 because you championed an idea that everyone claimed was impossible. My child arrived just last month. I was present because you refused to accept that skilled aviators should perish due to faulty engineering. Words cannot express my gratitude, yet I offer my sincere thanks. In 1955, the British installed angled flight decks on the Ark Royal. The French followed suit, converting the Clemenceau. Likewise, the Australians modified the Melbourne. By 1957, every major aircraft carrier in the Western world either featured an angled deck or was undergoing such retrofitting. The Soviets initially rejected this concept. However, in 1959, after a series of catastrophic landing incidents on their straight-deck carrier Varyag, they quietly implemented the angled deck design. Declassified Soviet naval records from 1993 reveal a 68% reduction in landing accidents within 6 months of this change. But the most compelling accounts originate from the pilots themselves. Captain John Moore, who conducted combat sorties over Vietnam from the USS Coral Sea, offers a poignant perspective. I executed 947 carrier landings between 1954 and 1973. On 62 occasions, I missed all the arresting wires, narrowly avoiding catastrophic barrier crashes. He continues, each time, I simply climbed away and re-attempted the approach. Every aviator of my generation has contemplated the fate of comrades who perished striking the barriers in the 1950s. The captain credits Dennis Cambell, who steadfastly advocated for the angled flight deck, as the reason they survived. By 1975, this innovative design had become an industry standard. That young pilots don't even realize carriers were once designed differently. The angled flight deck is no longer an innovation, but simply the standard way carriers operate. The revolution is complete when its impact becomes invisible. The angled deck saved countless lives, yet Dennis Cambell never sought recognition for his contribution. In fact, his actions after this breakthrough may surprise you even more. But before we explore that, if you know a veteran or military history enthusiast, consider sharing this video with them. These stories deserve to be remembered. Now, let's examine the fate of the man who forever transformed carrier aviation, Captain Dennis Cambell. Cambell never granted a single press interview about the angled deck. He was subsequently promoted to the rank of Rear Admiral in 1954. He was present at the ceremonial launch of HMS Ark Royal, the world's first aircraft carrier designed with an angled flight deck from the ground up. When reporters sought his remarks, he deferred to Louis Boddington and the engineers at Farnborough. The U.S. Navy later invited him to the commissioning of USS Forstall, the first American supercarrier equipped with an angled deck, steam catapults, and an optical landing system. However, Cambell sent his regrets, as he was attending the funeral of a Royal Navy lieutenant killed in a training accident, not a carrier-related incident, but a helicopter crash unrelated to his work, though the lieutenant had previously served under his command. In the year 1943, Cambell firmly believed that attending the funerals of one's comrades was a solemn duty. Years later, in 1957, the esteemed Admiral T bestowed upon him the prestigious CBE, or Commander of the Order of the British Empire, in recognition of his exceptional contributions to naval aviation. The citation, a mere 2 sentences, was carefully preserved by Cambell in a drawer. He subsequently retired from the Royal Navy in 1960 and transitioned into a role as a technical consultant for Hawker Siddeley Aviation, where he dedicated his efforts to the development of vertical takeoff jets. Colleagues fondly recalled Cambell's unwavering focus on pilot safety, often to the frustration of designers, as he meticulously incorporated redundancies into cockpit systems. Engineer Anthony Marsh recounted how Cambell would meticulously slow down every design review, posing questions such as, "What if this component fails at a critical moment?" The renowned aviator, Cambell, passed away at the remarkable age of 92 on April 6, 2000. His life's work left an indelible mark on the aviation industry, as evidenced by the extensive coverage in both The Times and The Guardian. While the obituaries acknowledged his pioneering contributions, they failed to fully capture the profound impact of his unwavering determination. Cambell's unwavering focus was not on the statistical probabilities, but rather on the individual pilots who faced the unforgiving challenges of carrier landings. He recognized that even the slightest misstep could have devastating consequences, and he dedicated his career to ensuring that such preventable tragedies would never occur. The legacy of Cambell's efforts can be seen in the universal adoption of the angled deck design on aircraft carriers worldwide, from the United States and its allies to the fleets of China and Russia. Today, every carrier landing is a testament to the vision and persistence of this remarkable individual, whose refusal to accept the status quo has forever transformed the face of naval aviation. The U.S. Navy's newest Gerald-class carriers, the pinnacle of modern carrier design, stand as a lasting tribute to Cambell's enduring influence. His story serves as a poignant reminder that true progress often emerges from the relentless pursuit of a single, unwavering goal: to protect the lives of those who risk everything in service of their nation. The Ford-class aircraft carriers boast cutting-edge electromagnetic catapults and arresting systems, yet their decks still maintain the iconic 8-degree port angle, precisely as Cambell envisioned in his 1951 design. Across the U.S. Navy's fleet, modern carrier pilots execute an astounding 15,000 landings annually, with a bolter rate of approximately 8% equating to around 1,200 missed wire approaches that would have resulted in catastrophic barrier crashes without the angled deck. This innovative feature has undoubtedly saved hundreds of lives each year, amounting to tens of thousands over the past 7 decades. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Black, a former U.S. Marine Corps pilot who flew FA-18s off carriers from 1985 to 2007, was so inspired by Cambell's vision that he tracked down the designer's family in 2003 to express his gratitude, stating, "I never met your father, but his revolutionary design has protected countless aviators like myself. I amassed an impressive tally of 147 successful carrier landings over the course of my aviation career. Regrettably, I also experienced 142 instances of boltering, where I missed all the arresting wires and had to execute a go-around on the straight deck. These were harrowing moments where I narrowly escaped potential disaster. Yet, your father afforded me 142 precious second chances, enabling me to continue my career and ultimately my life. On behalf of every carrier pilot who lived to fly another day thanks to his unwavering support, I extend my heartfelt gratitude. Tragically, Dennis Cambell never received the letter conveying this appreciation, as he had passed away 3 years prior. However, his son recognized the profound impact his father had made and chose to frame the letter, understanding that Cambell would have cherished this acknowledgement of his invaluable contributions more than any of his own accolades. Sometimes, the most significant breakthroughs do not originate from the experts, but from those who possess the wisdom to nurture and empower others. The individual who refused to accept the status quo as a valid justification was not an engineer or test pilot, but rather a bureaucrat. Captain Cambell, despite his administrative role, could not overlook the tragic loss of his comrades. These fallen colleagues had the audacity to put pen to paper, sketching a simple design that challenged conventional wisdom. The angled flight deck they envisioned would ultimately save more lives than any prestigious military honor. This innovation revolutionized naval warfare, surpassing even the transformative impacts of nuclear power and guided missiles. Yet, this pivotal advancement did not originate from committees or research facilities. Instead, it emerged from a train journey, a notebook, a hastily drawn sketch, and the unwavering determination to persist despite widespread skepticism. This, then, is the true narrative, a testament to the power of defying the impossible. The next trailblazer might not hail from the upper echelons of society, lacking the prestigious titles or accolades typically associated with history makers. They could simply be an individual who recognizes an issue that others have grown accustomed to and refuses to back down. The annals of history do not always belong to the most vocal or the highest ranking, but rather to the solitary voice unwilling to let good people perish for a flawed system.